Thank you. Thank you very much. What a great crowd. I appreciate you all coming. Thank you, Kevin. This is the first time I've been wired up with this gear, and so I was not going to sing you, wrap you up in my love, so don't worry about that. But let's see. May we have the lights, please? Thank you. Thank you. This subject, tower clocks and bells, a lot of people have asked me, why or how did you get started? And if I tell you it started when I was 2 years old, I just have to ask you to believe me, because that's how it started. I saw the bell go into our church tower at our church in Birmingham, Alabama. And I went back and researched it and found the newspaper clippings, and I really was 2 years old. It's a memory that I'll never forget. And one of my goals, even now, is to try to see that bell almost 60 years later. I've not been able to do that. The church has been sold to a different congregation, and it's just a matter of trying to find the right people sometimes. But anyway, that's my beginning. It's been lifelong. I'm 60 now. I don't mind saying I'm 60. So it's a good age, and I'm grateful for it. And what I'd like to start with in our discussion today, and I think I'm going to step down here so I don't do Peter Sellers, on tower clocks, striking tower clocks and bells here in Alabama. I'd like the first slide that I'd like to show you is a cutaway view from a Seth Thomas catalog published in 1911. That's this illustration. And then an actual model clock that's typical of what you would see in towers here in Alabama and nationwide. What I've found here in Alabama is there are two types of clocks that are predominant. There's the Seth Thomas striking tower clock, of which this is a model. And there's also the E. Howard and Company oval clock, which you'll see a photo of in just a second. Now, this particular clock here is called the number 16 8-day strike. It has a pendulum that can be anywhere from 4 to 8 feet long. What the pendulum bob itself weighs 135 to 175 pounds, and it can ring a 2,800 pound bell. It's almost like a ton and a half. And also, this is a neglected area, the dials. It can accommodate up to a 10-foot dial with the hands. You'll find that, and I will tell people, I'm a lifelong student. I think that, in fact, I met two gentlemen who just recently restored a clock at Macon County, and I told them that I'm honored to have you here because of their knowledge. This is a very specialized area, and if you could imagine the science of putting clocks together, repairing them, keeping them maintained, and keeping time, it's a very, very unique and science of genius. Now, if you look at the drawing on the left, and I hope I'm not blocking anyone's view, this is how it all works. You have the tower clock itself, the striking tower clock, which at that time was driven by weights that had to be wound once a week or every 8 days to keep the clock regular. And the clock's movements would drive to a universal joint here and move the hands on all four sides. And on the hour, there's a device on one side of this striking tower console that was called the rack and snail, and that would meter the time, and at the hour marked would would pull the cable that would strike, let the hammer strike the bell a number of times for each hour. I really am so glad that this illustration was something that I could bring to this lecture, because I think it brings it all home. The first courthouse, first tower clock I'd like to explore is the Lee County Courthouse in Opelika. This is a really fantastic architectural design. It was designed by A.J. Bryan. He was the architect. He did tons of designs through the South, through Alabama and the Southeast, even as far away as Arkansas and Texas. He was a phenomenal architect. And easily this style is, I would call it eclecticism, because that's really what it is. It's a fusion of different styles, all really very much residing here in the tower. You can see that fusion of, you can see Victorian and other influences, even some Gothic. Very, very unique design. Now, this particular clock has a E. Howard oval from 1896. If I don't go exactly along with the script, I hope you'll pardon me. I get excited talking about this stuff. But this one was restored. You see what beautiful machines they are, beautiful instruments. And this is the way they should be. I've seen some tower clocks that looked a little worse for the wear, that were neglected. But in Lee County, they're doing it right. And this is their striking bell, or you could say stationary clock bell. It was cast by E.W. Van Dusen in Cincinnati, which is also known as the Buckeye Bell Foundry. Somehow that name became another moniker, and so people knew it by the two names, and eventually I think the Buckeye Bell Foundry overcame the other names. But what you might, it's very difficult to detect, but right here there's a little etching, and you can't see it from the photograph, but this is what it says. The E. Howard Watch and Clock Company, Boston, New York, 1896. Now, I have seen etchings on bells where it included Chicago. I just wanted to show you another view. This is my favorite part of climbing towers, when you get up above the bell, or you go up. All my life I've loved to climb. And tree houses, everything. So this is a very unique situation of hanging a bell in a tower. Now, the trademark of the Van Dusen bell is 2 bolts. So you see those at the top here. It's fastened together by the 2 bolts. This bell was cast in the same year as Big Joe, which is shown here. This is for St. Francis de Sales Catholic Church in Cincinnati. If you look at this photograph a little bit, do you see anything here? Can anybody make out? People, right? People riding the bell to the top. Well, the reason that's so is because the diameter of Big Joe was 9 feet across. And the legend goes that they rang it once, and it shattered the windows in the nearby block. So they made it a stationary bell after that. But Big Joe is one of my favorite bells. Now, this is in the clock dial room, and I'm going to give credit to probate judge Bill English here. That's him doing some inspection. I would like to point out, this has all been restored, the universal joints, the rods, everything. See, this is beautiful industrial art, as well as just being functional. I mean, these are marvelous machines. The one thing I do want to call attention to is the plexiglass clock dial faces. That was a dead giveaway. The older ones were what were called skeletal dials, like these. And I'm here to say, to me, it's really a clock when you have those in the clock tower. I understand budgets and everything, but there's a whole art and craft to this. The very, very early clock faces, in most cases, were just wooden. They were made out of wood and painted, such as at Sanford Hall in Auburn. Their very early clock face was that way, and a number around the nation. So I think I missed a slide. Yeah. Early bells of Alabama. The Lafayette bell is one. This area of early bells is just, how can I say? One thing that we can know about early bells is early bells did exist, but most of the time they were on steamships. And around the 1830s, they were on trains. There were bells that were cast, but unfortunately, we don't have many records to show us where they were. It's just, very, very scant information. But this is a gem here. This is actually a property of the archives. The Lafayette bell was dated 1821. It honored the Marquis de Lafayette, or General Lafayette, when he came here, and is known as Alabama's Liberty Bell, and is also purported to be known as Freeney's Bell, which they pay homage to at the tavern downtown, which actually is where this is hanging now, on the inside. Now, possibly, this bell was, I believe, it was a ship's bell because of this connection here. Usually, ship's bells had a large plate that was part of the casting in a hole in the center, and that's a very, very telling trademark of ship's bell. So possibly this was a ship's bell, maybe on a steamboat before it became the Freeney's Tavern's bell or the Lafayette bell. And there was a gentleman in business, James P. Allaire, who owned Howell Ironworks, and he made bells early in the 19th century. Here's the State House at Cahaba. It's one of my favorite structures. If you notice sorry about this. If you'll notice, this is called, they called it a dome. I would want to call it a cupola, but it was referred to as a dome. The question comes up, was there a bell in the dome? And honestly, I don't know. But I do think that it's probable or possible that there was, because when the legislature was in session, a bell was used to announce the hour, used to make announcements in its office. So I think that it's very possible that it did have a bell. In the 1830s, this dome was moved to this structure in Lounsboro. And of course, that's the dome there. And it now is atop the CME Church in Lounsboro. Major William Robinson of Lounsboro moved it by I forget how many teams of oxen to move it over from Cahaba all the way to Lounsboro, and placed it atop the church there. There is a bell in the tower now. Interesting thing about this bell is that it is very historic. It's not original to the dome, to the cupola, but it's very, very rare because it was cast by Register and Webb in 1856. Now, if you go looking for a Register and Webb bell anywhere, you're going to come up empty-handed, because I have checked, I've looked high and low and tried to find. Usually you can find, when bells are plentiful, you can find people who have them. They're in museums. But Register and Webb is a very, very unusual casting. And I told the good people in Lounsboro, you need to really hang on to this bell. Don't let anybody try to buy it or take it away. Here we have the 1829 State Capitol in Tuscaloosa. The architect was William Nichols, who also designed the University of Alabama's campus. Can everyone see the little bell coat here, that there is a bell? Once again, we don't know what the bell what it was, who cast it. We just know that there is one. I've tried to enlarge that photograph to see if I could find some details, and it's just very, very difficult. But I think in 1829 there would be very few foundries. Probably, my guess is that because of the expense of building the Capitol, that they probably didn't have a lot of funds for a bell. My guess is that they probably went with an iron bell, once again by the Howell Iron Works. I think that was probably very probable. Now we come to one of the most exciting parts of my journey with respect to historic bells, and that is the aspect of Revere bells being in Alabama. I don't want to ask for a show of hands, but would anybody have thought that a bell cast by Paul Revere's company would be here in Alabama? That's the furthest thing from my mind when I started this journey. But there are. And let me introduce you to Paul Revere. Everybody knows him as a Midnight Rider, but he also, of course, everybody in a secondary sense knows that he was a silversmith, coppersmith, wonderful artisan. But I have to tell you the story, how he became to cast bells. The bell in his church, the New Brick Meeting House, cracked or broke. And the trustees of the church were saying that we should pack the bell up and send it back to England and have it recast or buy another bell. And Paul Revere overheard this, and he went to the vicar and he said, "Why don't you let me have a shot at it?" I'm paraphrasing, 21st century talk. He said, "Let me have a chance to do it and see if I can really cast this bell for you." Well, he did, and that's the bell. That's his very first bell. Was cast in 1792. It now resides in St. James Episcopal Church in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and the people identified in the photograph very kindly sent me this photo of the bell. People were marvelous in the making of this book, just with the generosity and kindness to send me materials and resources. The picture at the right is of Paul Revere about the time that he began casting bells in 1792. And he learned from some of the bell artisans that were already noted, but they weren't that numerous in the colonies. They really weren't. Now, our Revere bell, our true blue Revere bell, is found in the Tuscaloosa Methodist Church. The earliest church was built in around 1828. And in 1920 it was demolished to build the new sanctuary. And this bell ended up in a heap of debris. Garbage was going to be carted away. And Bishop Clare Purcell noticed the bell sitting in the heap, rescued it, took tender loving care of it, and made sure that it had a prominent place in that church's life after that. That if it wasn't for him, we wouldn't be here looking at this. The bell was cast in 1828. The inscription reads, "Revere Boston." One thing about Revere bells is their inscriptions vary. Sometimes it's Revere Boston, Revere and Sons. It's just amazing. I think at one point they had Boston and Braintree. They kind of experimented a little bit with some of the company names. But it was a gift of Samuel St. John Jr. and Joshua B. Levins of Mobile. No one knows why these gentlemen gave them a bell. It's just written in the record. To see this bell in real life, if you come to Tuscaloosa to the Ernest and Hadley bookstore on Saturday, I'll be glad to show you a slide presentation of me climbing the tower with the church facilities manager. Just to see this bell was a great joy. To put your hands on something that's 1828. I mean, how many times in life do you get to? You can put your hands on a 56 Chevy. But 1828, it's just a remarkable feeling. I mean, I just can't tell you as a historian the feeling it gives you to see something like this. And it's so beautiful and so well preserved. And I love the detail. Actually, this form of the casting of bells is my favorite, with the crown, all the reeds, and just its shape. It's just beautiful. Let me point out something else. The roundness of the bell is owed to the English and French tradition. Now, there's a distinction I'll show you in just a moment. The Revere Company changed hands in 1828. So this bell, the previous bell we looked at, that was one of the last ones that came out of the Revere family business before it changed to Mr. Hooper. And here we have a drawing of Mr. Hooper's company. This is Henry N. Hooper, who was a company agent. He acquired the company from the Reveres. It was a very, very, when I say hot and contested, it really was. But he had the capital, and the court sided with him to take possession of the company. But everything was the same. Same personnel, same templates, molds, same location, same recipe, ingredients for bell casting, everything. So he carried on the Revere tradition, and in my view, this makes them, and I want to say in the thinking of Edward and Evelyn Stickney, who are the foremost authorities on the Reveres, that they have passed on, but their research was 50 years in the making, and they include Hooper bells in their anthology. I'm so sorry for these slides jumping. In Raymer, Alabama, lo and behold, Raymer is a wonderful place, but would you expect that there would be a Hooper bell in the tower of the old Raymer Baptist Church? Now it's Sampe Memorial Baptist Church. And a fine bell. This is a picture of a blow-up of that Winslow Homer drawing. And I was going to show you this slide to show you that this, I believe, is Henry N. Hooper. And this is a gentleman named William Blake. We'll come to William Blake here in just a second. I'm so sorry. Seems like I'm missing a slide here. Oh yes, this is where we move on to William Blake. After Hooper died, William Blake, who is here, succeeded Henry N. Hooper. And of Blake, now I need to note, Blake was the reason that the Revere bells and the Hooper bells became musically and tonally perfect, because he had a musical ear. It was said of Revere, in fact, I think it was the vicar who said, we all may be thankful that Mr. Revere can make a bell, but we may not all be glad for the sound. William Blake was the gentleman who made the difference. And here in Alabama, at Tuskegee University, where I work, we have a Blake bell. Actually, it's very special. I think it's one of the last ones that came out of the foundry in 1894. That's around the time that you see that George Lane acquired the foundry and demolished it. Somewhere 1894, 96. And this was a gift from Northern Friends to Tuskegee. You can see it on the inscription. And this is a picture of Thrasher Hall at the upper left, which is still there today, designed by Robert R. Taylor, of whom our school is named for. The Gainesville Presbyterian Church is another location for not only a Blake bell, but a Hooper bell. The first bell was, in fact, a Hooper bell, showing it on the left. Cast in 1839, it cracked at a funeral of a Mr. Bliss, but was replaced by the present bell, shown at the right, with silver dollars, creating a half-ton bell added to make a sweeter sound. Now, that's the legend that silver dollars were added into the mix. And it is an enormous bell. Okay. When you think of the Liberty Bell, I'm very sure that before you got here, can I ask for a show of hands? How many people knew the Liberty Bell had come through Alabama? You don't have to raise your hand. I certainly didn't. I didn't know that. But to tell you the story, I need to tell you the story of the Liberty Bell. And let me share, the chronology of Independence Hall. This is Independence Hall, begun in 1732, and this is as it appeared in 1752 when the Liberty Bell was cast. And the Liberty Bell hung right there in that part of the tower. This is a picture of the same picture of Independence Hall, known as the Pennsylvania State House. And you can see that the steeple part is gone, and the Liberty Bell has now been lowered into this part. Now, this is where it was during 1776. And there's a debate about whether the Liberty Bell actually rang. Personally, I believe that it did, because the account says that all the bells in the city rang. That would have to include the Liberty Bell. It wasn't cracked. Wasn't cracked then, but it must have rang that day. Some people say no, but I say yes. Here we have the present form of Independence Hall, which was renovated in 1828. The main tower was done by William Strickland, famous architect at the time. He did the Tennessee State Capitol. He was really one of the I want to say the signature architects of the time. So they got a really great architect to do redo the tower. Now, the connection that the Liberty Bell has to Alabama is found in the person of John Wilbank, who initialed his bells as J. Wilbank. And the connection here in Alabama is through the Greensboro Presbyterian Church, where we have a bell that was cast by John Wilbank in 1841, 13 years after he saved the Liberty Bell, quite reluctantly, I might add, because I'm going to go back to the previous slide. His job was to create a bell that would replace the one in the tower there. And he did. But the city of Philadelphia said, we're going to pay you $400 to take the old bell, which was a Liberty Bell, and cart it away. Scrap. Can you imagine? He objected and said, hey, city of Philadelphia, you're not paying me enough to do this. So it got into a legal log jam. And the final outcome of that legal logjam was that the judge awarded the bell to John Wilbank, but required him to put it on permanent loan with the city of Philadelphia. And did you know there's still people in the Wilbank family that are trying to get the bell even today? That's true. That's true. So it's kind of get hard to get past the federal, these days, but they still try. But John Wilbank cast this bell. He had a completely different style of casting bells. I want to show you the difference between the English and French lip is what's known as a sharp German lip right there. It's like a sheer profile. So John Wilbank was German, and he had a gentleman working with him named Joseph Bernhard, who cast bells, and they eventually took over the Wilbank Foundry and cast bells in the same manner. But I think this is so neat that Alabama has a bell by John Wilbank. You will not find a J. Wilbank bell hardly anywhere. And there's one here in Alabama, in Greensboro. And it has a crack on it. It actually has a slight crack. I don't know if you can see it. I don't know if the photograph shows it. Let's see. Right there. Just like the Liberty Bell. So they need to kind of pay attention to it. All right, now we come to the part where the Liberty Bell comes to Alabama. The Liberty Bell traveled for the first time in 1885. This was a journey where this whole idea came about because of an exposition in New Orleans. The mayor of New Orleans wrote to the mayor of Philadelphia requesting the Liberty Bell to come to New Orleans. The whole purpose of this excursion was to promote healing between the North and the South. And a lot of people feel that it did. They think that it really accomplished the objective. You see on the right the schedule of the Liberty Bell train. It shows that it came into Birmingham at 3 p.m. It actually arrived at 4:30 in the afternoon. But it came to a tremendous reception. You could not believe. I mean, the account is how many? It says fully 2,000 persons assembled at the depot. Speeches by the mayor, by the Honorable Party, Joshua T. Owen from Philadelphia. They said that the account was that people were on boxcars, on top of boxcars and freight cars, on the roof of the terminal to try to get a look at the Liberty Bell. Children were screaming to touch it, pleading with the policeman to let them touch it. It took an incredible band of police actually to keep the crowd at bay from the Liberty Bell. And of course we see it in its carriage here, a special train. It's a typical car that's been cut down and modified with a guardrail and guards. You see this, the handshake, Philadelphia, New Orleans. The handshake, trying to show or signify healing. Really, really unique. This is an incredible account. And here is actually its destination, the World's Industrial and Cotton Centennial Exposition of New Orleans in 1885. And this picture on the right showing it at its display at the exposition. Here we have our own Liberty Bell. I would say maybe most of you know about it, right on the Capitol grounds. This was the 1950 Liberty Bell replica that was given during the U.S. Savings Bond drive of the same year. It was cast by the French firm of Picard, which has been casting bells since 1796. And it really matches the Liberty Bell exactly. It really does. Even the assembly of the yoke at top, pretty close. If you've not seen it or not noticed it, I invite you to go by and look at it, and just you can get a good impression of the Liberty Bell just by looking at that bell. It's really, really very well done. Now we come to Civil Wars of Alabama, Civil War bells of Alabama. like to start with the Church of the Nativity in Huntsville. The first bell was bronze, cast in 1859, recorded to cost $250, but yet, not long after it was hung, it was carried off to Mississippi to be used in the Confederacy for munitions. But it was replaced by a large steel bell, eventually cast in 1865, by the Nacre Vickers Bell Foundry of Sheffield, England. Let me tell you, that bell is loud. I don't know what it is, the difference between bronze and steel, but it felt like when I heard it down on the first floor, I just wondered if I needed to go down to Pharmex and get some earplugs. And that was just with a hammer. If you can imagine a bell like this swing ringing, and it becomes twice the weight, and the sound is amplified because bells have 3 sound bows, and especially reverberation off the tower walls and so forth. It was extremely loud. Very effective. It's a great bell for this church because of this very nice tall tower designed by Wills and Dudley, the same firm that did St. John's downtown. It was a New York architectural firm. This is a very hopeful story. And we have friends here today from the First Presbyterian Church in Wetumpka. We all sympathize with their tremendous loss of the church during the recent tragedy of the tornado, but thank the Lord that the church is being rebuilt now, and the bell survived. The bell survived the tower falling to the ground. Pastor Jonathan Yarbrough showed me a video of the bell being salvaged and raised from the wreckage, and it rang when it was raised. I thought that was a tremendous and positive motif, a nuance. And a lot of people don't know that it survived the Confederate furnace. Actually, this church tried to donate the bell to the Confederate cause during the Civil War, and they rejected the bell. The command in Richmond sent a letter to the church, and they said, "Thank you, but our furnaces are full." So I'm thankful that they did, because it's a beautiful bell. The patina is wonderful. It's just incredible. Let me call attention to this while I'm on this slide about this issue of patina. When people see a bell and they see that polychromatic film on the bell, and it's got the age look, and some people think that that's a bad thing, but actually that's the value of the bell. That is a very, very desirable quality to have if you have an old bell. The mistake some people make is they want to send this off to the factory and get it polished. And that's what's known as skinning the bell. It actually affects the sound. It can actually affect the sound and the tonality of the bell. And so you still have a historic bell, but it's in age, it's in the date only sometimes, and it's no longer the same sound. But the patina is everything, and this bell has a very wonderful patina. Now, see, it needs to be cleaned up, but that's what you want, is that green, almost where the bell oxidizes, and some of those the metals come to the surface and they form that film. Beautiful. It's very beautiful. Okay, Civil Rights Bells of Alabama. Let's start with the 16th Street Baptist Church, which was designed by Wallace Rayfield. The bell was cast by the National Bell Foundry of Cincinnati. That particular foundry pretty closely modeled their castings off of the ideas of a man named Charles Stephen Bell, and he actually cast bells. So sometimes when I'm describing bells, I'll say that's a CS bell, because I don't want to say that's a CS Bell bell. So what's in a name, you know? Everyone, we all feel very much for the tragedy of 63, and this bell shook, very much shook. I'm really amazed that the building held together as well as it did through the years. You know, I'm very sure that it affected, they have probably had to inspect the tower and make sure everything was okay after the bombing, because that kind of blast, tragedy of life, is, you know, we can't even say words. But, you know, in trying to go forward and make the church safe, and, you know, they did a remarkable job. This is one of my favorite pictures of the bell during the anniversary of the Civil Rights March on Washington, honoring Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech. You can see the bell has been, it's had some age on it, a lot of use. It hasn't been painted. That's a good thing. Bells like this that are cast iron or steel, it's best to not paint them, but try to treat them with, you know, the kind of chemical treatments that will, you know, what's the term, rust elimination. And it's possible. It's possible to do. Here we have the Brown Chapel AME Church. The building itself was designed by A.J. Farley and celebrated as a landmark starting point of the Selma to Montgomery March for Civil Rights. The bell was cast by McShane Bell Foundry of Baltimore in 1881. And this is the bell's inscription. Interesting thing here, Henry McShane was an apprentice of Joshua Register, if you remember, who made the bell for the Lounsboro Church. And this bell did ring on Bloody Sunday. Edward Davis, the sexton of the church, did ring for regular worship service, and this was confirmed recently by Mrs. Joyce O'Neill Parrish to Reverend Leotis Strong. So this bell has a very, very strong and marked significance for the Civil Rights March and the history thereof. This is getting to something that's very much on my heart, a town clock for all of Alabama. I'm speaking of our state capitol. Of course, this is the first state capitol designed by Stephen Decatur Button, which unfortunately burned here. Hope everyone can see that. It stood for 2 years and then burned. One thing that you notice right away is there's no clock. No clock in the design. Clocks were very rare for capitals, if you think about it. But the good people of Montgomery wanted a town clock. So they petitioned the legislature, and on February 9th, 1852, legislation was passed to place a town clock on top of the Capitol's portico, which is where it is now. And might I add, ours is the only state capitol in America with a striking tower clock. I really ask you to look at each capital of the 50 states and even their precedents. I don't think you might find one. I have not found one yet. But this is a very, very unique architectural convention. And a lot of people don't know that our Capitol clock has a bell. And the bell is right behind the clock itself. Now I'm going to throw an architectural term out at you. If you see this next time, You can call this an edicula. An edicula, I'm teaching architecture now. An edicula is a basic Greek form for a temple. It's like its most essential form for a temple. So our clock is created in the form of a Greek temple edicula atop the Capitol. And our bell, no less, was cast by Henry N. Hooper in 1850. Now keep in mind, the legislation was 1852. This bell is 1850. The clock I'm about to show you is circa 1854. This bell has been compared to being close to the size of a Liberty Bell. It is huge, this bell. This is an inscription on the inside of the clock, dating it to when it was electrified by G. Paul Rowland and V.R. Lyon. And here is the Capitol. This is actually, this clock is no longer in the Capitol right now. It's in the basement because the clock has been modified to 21st century digital. But we have a Howard and Davis striking tower clock that was built circa 1854. And here we see the electrification of it. I'm showing this slide as a comparison, our Capitol clock versus one that was restored at the Jamaica Plain Unitarian Universalist Church in Jamaica Plain, Massachusetts. At one time, this was the Capitol clock. Can you imagine? It's an important part of the Capitol's history. This is a stripped down version. This is after it was electrified. But this is a more of up close and personal shots of the Jamaica Plain clock. And I just think it's wonderful. I would like to propose that our Capitol would restore this clock, along with attaching it again to the striking bell. And even though, this is 21st century, I think it would be such a wonderful convention. Because, to close with this, that we cherish the gifts of time that our ancestors gave us. For in cherishing them, we better understand their time, and so in turn also better understand our own time, and in turn help those ahead of us better understand their time. I close with the picture of the bicentennial bell cast by Marshall Christie and his team from Sloss Furnace, which is a wonderful bell made of Alabama pig iron, and it sounds bronze. It sounds like a bronze bell. In Birmingham, at the Sloss Furnace. So you can see it. If you drive to the Sloss Furnace, it's on display for anyone to see. And I thank you. Thank you so much.
We have time for a few questions. If anyone has any, just raise your hand. We'll get the microphone to you.
Really doesn't have anything to do with bells, but I have 4 antique clocks in my house, 3 of which need work. Know of anybody nearby who does that?
The 2 gentlemen behind you, right there, they're master clock and watch artisans. Yes.
Do you have sounds from any of these bells? I was wondering what the sound differences were, like in bronze and the pig iron and the iron.
That's a very good question. I did not record. I wish that I had That's a very good question. But you know that if I could elaborate, every bell has a unique sound, and it's something that in the future I may do because in fact, my son Tommy had suggested that to me. I don't want to embarrass him, but but he suggested that, and that's a very good question. That's the beauty of bells; they're so varied. They're almost like their own person. No two bells are exactly alike, but when you hear the difference between bronze and steel alloy or cast iron, is like night and day. You know, the cast iron clang, or it's a more two-dimensional sound, static, but the bronze has appeal, it's musical. You know, and the bicentennial bell has a musical quality. And I told the director of Sloss that artisan, I think he was experimenting to see what he could do with pig iron, and he succeeded. He really did. Yes.
I live in Lounsboro, and our church, the Lounsboro Presbyterian Church, our notes are in history is very sketchy, but it says our bell was shipped from Philadelphia in 1860, and I was wondering if it might be a Philadelphia bell. I have no idea, but it really whetted my interest when you made mention
Sure.
of that as it correlated with the brief historical things that we have.
Sure. Is the bell still in the church now?
Yes, sir. It still rings.
May I come to your church?
Yeah, I'll give you my phone number. And,
Please. I have asked about your church a number of times, and I never could get a answer about a bell. By the way, King Memorial Church may not have a bell. I love them. St. Jude doesn't have a bell. But to answer your question, there could only be 2 people or 3 in Philadelphia: the Dyer Foundry, T.I. Dyer, Joseph Bernhard, or by that time it would be Joseph Bernhard. So, yes, I would love to see it.
I'll see you after this.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you for coming. I also would second the lady saying it would be lovely to have a recording of these different bells, because now I'm really interested in the difference between a peal and a clang. But anyway,
Right.
And but one of my questions was, what causes a bell to crack?
Good question. That's a very good. Did you know when, let's say, Paul Revere or anyone makes a bell, Paul Revere guaranteed the bell for a year, free of defects, but he had instructions on how to ring the bell, and cracks can happen by over-ringing the bell, or you can ring a bell too hard in the wrong way. That's why they put in the clapper springs to keep the bell from double ringing on the inside. But and they crack for other various. Sometimes it is the mixture. You know, sometimes it's 70% copper, 20% tin, I think, and there's other metals that go into it. And a real bell maker knows how to make a good bell. I mean, it's almost like a cook. You know, when they're cooking, and my mom was a chef. She was a cook, and you know, she would be in the kitchen and get a taste, and but they don't. Of course, they don't do that in the foundry. But they can listen and find out. Yeah, great question.
I just wanted to comment that the Wetumpka bell at First Presbyterian Church, we're members there, will be on the ground, and you can look at it up close for another maybe 2 or 3 months. And then the sanctuary is going to be framed. And the tower is going to be steel in the current construction to make sure that there's no possibility of a collapse of the tower.
Right.
And it will be built according to modern standards, but it will have the same image because the Presbyterian church is a very significant image of the community and is
Absolutely.
often portrayed in art, and so it will have the same appearance as the historic church.
Thank you. Oh, that's awesome. That is awesome to hear. Wonderful news.
We have one final question back here.
Why do they get rid of bells when they crack?
Pardon?
Why do they get rid of bells when they crack?
Why do they get rid of bells when they crack? From just from my research, it seems like if your bell cracks, if your bell cracks, you can you could take the bell down, ship it back to the foundry in the order for a new bell, and you could get a credit applied for towards your new bell, almost like trading cars. You could, what is it? You trade in allowance, and then because the bells themselves, just as objects of expensive metals, they're worth a lot of money just because of the metal. So that's the number one reason. That's the number one reason. Yeah.
Can it be repaired?
Yes. In fact, if you all want to look up the Gloriosa in Germany, that bell is the oldest swing ringing and I think largest. It's one of the oldest and largest swing ringing bells in Germany, in Erfurt at the cathedral. And it had a crack. And this is what I love about the Europeans. They have a can-do attitude, and they fixed it by welding. And it still has, they used a particular method, and it still has the same sound. These are great questions. I don't want to stop. Sorry.
Round of applause for Thomas Coughlin.
Thank you.